Thank you, Elaine. And it's nice to see 3 generations of your family. I think it's 3 anyway. Yeah, it is. Good. Good. Let's see if anyone can beat that. Who can get 4? All right. Could we maybe Jack, could you turn the heating off? I'm from Scotland and it's now getting hot. It's above 10 degrees. So we are going to look at Acts chapter 25, and we've been going through the book of Acts, and I would say, as I keep saying this, when I started looking at this, I was thinking, how does all this work out in our lives? And I hope that you'll see, as we look at this, that it has a great deal to say to us, whoever you are. So, maybe I want to just ask, I also say something, I pretty well guarantee that you'll learn a new word today, no matter who you are. And if you don't, then I bow down before your genius, because I learned a new word from this. But I want to ask this. Do you ever ask yourself why you are where you are at? Or maybe put it another way, why do bad things happen to good people? What's going on in this world? And sometimes it seems very confusing, and sometimes it seems in your life as though you're being hit by one thing after another. So when we read this passage, we're going to talk about something that's called God's providence, and at the end I'm going to explain in a little bit more detail what that word means. That's not the new word, by the way, but it's really, really important thing to understand. So let me read. I'm actually going to read the whole story to start with, and then I'll say something about the Pilgrim's Progress. You'll see why in a minute. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who'd come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. "I've done nothing against the Jewish law, or against the temple, or against Caesar." Now, can I just say, those of you who've been following through with this, this is the first time Caesar's really brought into it. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul answered, "I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I've not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You have appealed to Caesar you will go." A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, "There's a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. So I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. But when Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar." Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear this man myself." He replied, "Tomorrow you will hear him." Now, this is the question. Reading all of that, Paul was so important to the early church. Paul had spread the gospel in Greece and in Turkey and in Syria and in Israel. And he had this mission to go to Rome, to Spain, maybe many, many other places. And he gets shoved in prison. Now that's a big, big, big question. Why did that happen? There was a man called John Bunyan. He was a tinker. That's how he described himself. He was a poor man. And he turned out to be an absolutely brilliant preacher. And he got thrown into prison for 12 years. Why place John Bunyan in prison? Well, one of the things is he wrote a very famous book. I was going to ask you what it is, but you can read. So, The Pilgrim's Progress. After the Bible and Harry Potter, it's the most bought book in the world. It's astonishing. The Pilgrim's Progress. And by the way, it is so worth reading The Pilgrim's Progress. I've read it through, I don't know how many times. And as I was preparing for this, I thought, I'm going to read it again because it's just an amazing book. And Bunyan was in prison. Now, the Pilgrim's Progress, there's so many phrases that have come into the English language from it. From this poor tinker locked up in prison. "Come, pluck up heart, let's neither faint nor fear. Better, though difficult, the right way to go than wrong, though easy, where the end is woe. What God says is best, though all the men in the world are against it. To go back is nothing but death. To go forward is fear of death, and life everlasting beyond it. I will yet go forward. As for your burden, be content to bear this load till you come to the place of deliverance, for there it will fall from your back of its own accord." I love this one. "There is in Jesus Christ more merit and righteousness than the whole world has need of." And also this, "Jesus has given me rest by means of his sorrow and life by means of his death." Bunyan in prison had far more impact than Bunyan preaching around Bedford and elsewhere. And paradoxically, I would say that Paul in prison ultimately had far more impact than if he had gone to North Africa or gone to India or all the places he could have gone. And that's because, as another well-known poet, William Cowper, said, "Behind a frowning providence there hides a smiling face." Now, Cowper was a man, some of you will know this, some of you won't, but he so suffered from depression that particularly over winter, sometimes he was debilitated. I mean, he couldn't go out, he couldn't do things for 6 months at a time. And I'm reading his letters just now, and he wrote a lot of letters back and forward between him and John Newton. And he really struggled. He really struggled. But I think because he struggled, he was able to write things like, "Behind a frowning providence there hides a smiling face." So what's happening here? The governor Felix is replaced by Festus when Paul was in prison. Felix, by the way, was recalled to Rome according to the Jewish historian Josephus, again reminding us that this is history we're dealing with, not myth. He was recalled because there was a dispute between Jews and Syrians over their respective civil rights in Caesarea. There were riots and marches and bloodshed, and all I can say, ain't the world the same? Ain't the world the same? What's going on in Gaza and Israel right now? What's going on in Ukraine? What's going on in Australia and in the UK and in America? People fight one another over what they call their rights. So I thought what I would do this morning is look at, first of all, faltering Festus. He was a powerful politician, just to say some things about him. But he needed to have the Jewish leadership on board. If you're governing and you don't have the people, you are in deep, deep trouble. He seems to have been more moderate and more just than the governor before him, or indeed those who were to come after. And what we read, the whole passage you read, is an example of that, because he was determined to stick to the law. He, in Roman law, charges had to be formulated and then sustained by the prosecutor. So let's say, I hope this never happens, but let's say one of you wanted to prosecute me. You'd have to go to the police, they'd put it to the prosecutor would decide if there are charges to be brought. And in Roman law, then what would happen is, would have to go to court, and you'd have to accuse me to my face. There'd have to be a public charge against me rather. And then I would have the right to answer, and then the procurator or prosecutor would determine the case. So that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to make it fair. However, he's also a coward. Look at verse 9. It says, Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem? Now, he must have known, because before he refused, he must have known that they were going to try and kill him. And maybe he just thought, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's within my legal right to send him to Jerusalem to be tried there. If they attack him and kill him, that gets rid of a problem for me. They'll also be very happy. Maybe it was a kind of act of political expediency to throw Paul to the wolves. I don't wish to say anything against politicians, but we see that all the time. Let's let them go. Let them be dealt with. And he was not in control. Look at verse 12. You have appealed to Caesar you will go. Now, why do I say he was not in control? This is around the year AD 60. We can be that precise. There was to be a really bad civil war in Israel, AD 66 to 70, when at the end the temple would be destroyed and the Romans would kill about 1 million Jews. Extraordinary. And by the way, you're wondering, in today's world, all this stuff about Palestine and Israel and Gaza, and you get people saying, well, Israel only came into existence in 1947. No, Israel existed here. But the Romans wanted rid of the Jews, and they basically set up a province called Palestinia. And it was first of all a province of the Roman Empire, then of the Byzantine Empire, then of the Muslim Caliphate. But this is the beginnings of all of that. And I say all this in terms of Festus, because he may have thought, I'm here, I'm going to be around for a while, I'm making my plans. He died in AD 62. He only had 2 years. He didn't know that. He's sitting on a court. He didn't know that was going to be. And then something else, we know this. He heard the gospel. This trial was probably the first time he met Paul. One thing you could guarantee with Paul, whoever he was going to speak to, he was going to bring the gospel in some way or other. And also, we know this. In verse 20, we're told that he was very confused. He says this, I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. And that, again, just let me say that's very, very true of so many of us in our culture, and even so many people within the church, and so many people when you come to church and you first hear the Bible and you go, well, wait a minute, what does this mean? This is actually really confusing. Well, you're in good company. That's why we need to discuss it and to explain it and to think about it. So I think that's Festus. I think in some ways you could see him as a good leader and a just man, but also a bit of a politician, a bit of a coward, and a confused man, and a man, although he had great political power, wasn't in control. And then there's progressing Paul. Now that's not progressive Paul. We're not speaking in today's language. It's progressing Paul. Paul, this is where he is. Paul is going on towards his goal. It may look as though he's going backwards, but he's not. He was opposed by powerful people. In verses 1 to 5, we see that there's the chief priest, and the new one was a man called Ishmael. And they were out to get him. He had the religious authorities against him, and he had the political authorities against him. He was an innocent man. They brought many serious charges, verse 7, but they could not prove them. He was accused of attacking Jewish law, of defiling the temple, and encouraging civil unrest. There were religious and political charges against him. I've a woman I actually know called Lois McCletchy Miller. She's a wonderful woman, a great Christian activist in the UK. She was arrested in Belgium for having a banner saying something like, I think it was men can't become women or something. Now, imagine being arrested even just for that. And in the interview, she talks about how she was treated and everything that was involved, but she was completely exonerated because she was innocent of breaking any law. It was just, in a sense, almost just harassment. Well, this is what's happening to Paul, but much more serious because his life was very much at risk. Then notice at verse 8, Paul could debate and reason. Verse 8, he doesn't just say, I'm innocent. He makes his defense. And then in verse 11, he's brave. So he says, if I'm guilty of doing anything deserving death, I don't refuse to die. But at the same time, he's not suicidal. Because the reason he appealed to Caesar was he knew as well as anyone that if he went back to Jerusalem, he would almost certainly be assassinated. And appealing to Caesar was really quite extraordinary because Caesar at that time was a man called Nero. Nero is one of the most wicked rulers who's ever lived. You know what the equivalent is? It's not like me saying, okay, I appeal to Anthony Albanese. It's not the same. It's like a Chinese Christian saying, I appeal to Xi Jinping. Whoa, you're going to appeal to the great communist leader? Or it's like a Russian or a Ukrainian saying, I appeal to Putin. That really is the level at which it's at. Why did he do that? Because I think for two reasons. First of all, he worked out he had a better chance with the Roman emperor than he did with the Jewish leaders, which is really shameful. And secondly, because he was determined to go to Rome, and to appeal to Caesar meant he would get to go and speak before Caesar. Now, I think there's something here about how we deal with the civil government. God has ordained the civil government, but we have a confession of faith that says this: the civil magistrate may not assume to himself the administration of the word and sacraments or the power of the keys of the kingdom of heaven. What that means is very simple. Newcastle City Council cannot say, we would like to see your sermons so we can approve them first. Or this is how you are to do communion. I'm saying, look, if you really want to upset Presbyterian elders, try and change the communion and see what happens. Maybe I'll bring the civil authority in to do that. But the civil authority does not have that power. And they may think they do. And more, I think, the civil authorities are because they reject God. But we would always refuse, and we would always appeal to the higher courts. There's a Finnish member of parliament who 5 years ago, this has been going on for 5 years, was charged by the Finnish prosecutor with hate speech because she quoted the Bible. And she was found guilty, but she appealed to the Supreme Court in Europe and she won her case. It took that long for her to win her case. So we have a right of appeal to higher courts. I'm not saying anything about this case other than there's a famous case in the United Kingdom of a woman called Lucy Connolly who tweeted out a horrible tweet and went to jail for 31 months because of that. She went to jail because she pled guilty. There's somebody else who did an even worse offense who pled not guilty, and he was let off. He was found not guilty, which was quite astonishing. The lesson Paul is saying is, I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. If a government was to accuse me of hate speech, I would plead not guilty because I hope not under any circumstances would I engage in hate speech. It's not hate speech. Speaking the truth is not hate speech. So, he wasn't pleading guilty for something he hadn't done. Then verse 19, I love this. The thing that Festus knew about Paul was that Paul claimed that a dead man named Jesus was alive. I think Paul believed in the risen Christ, and because he believed in the risen Christ, he was prepared to go wherever God's providence took him. Now, it's very interesting here how Paul's guided in this respect. There's nothing here that says that an angel came to Paul and told him, this is what you must do. And I think Paul, do you know what? If I was Paul, what I would have done, and maybe he did this, I don't know. We don't know if he did this or not. But I would have prayed, Lord, you've given me a set of cards. I really don't like the cards I've been dealt. Can you give me a new hand? You know, this is my life. This is not good. And what he actually did, instead of complaining, I think, was he made a wise choice based on a rational reflection from the information he had at the time. How are we guided? There are far too many Christians who kind of say, well, I can't do this or I can't do that unless I get a direct word from the Lord. I say, no, that's not right. Derek Thomas summed it up this way: God's guidance for us at the moment is to pray, think hard, and make the choice that seems most compatible with good sense. It's like Paul, imagine Paul saying, Lord, I've thought about these things here in prison. Despite the circumstances, this is what I've decided to do. I've tried to make it the right decision. If it is the right one, please confirming it by giving me peace in my heart. And if for any reason I've not decided right, then, straighten out these things and prevent them from going any further. And I think that's a model for us in guidance, because otherwise we're going to get crippled. And I mean emotionally, physically, spiritually crippled, because we daren't do anything unless we're absolutely certain that God has told us to do it, but we don't know how God tells us, and we mistake our feelings for what God tells us. And we end up with just in phenomenal difficulty. The most extreme case I've ever met for that is a woman who became ill, and she would step out her cottage in the morning and worry about whether God wanted her to turn right or to turn left, because if she turned right, she might miss the appointment God had with her for somebody else. And if she turned left, that might be, how was she to know? Well, God doesn't give you that. God doesn't tell you, oh, you got to turn right, you got to turn left, you got to go to this restaurant. I mean, imagine you finish here and you decide you want to go out for some food, and you say, Lord, you have to guide me to the right restaurant. Well, how would you do it? Open up the Bible and it will tell you which restaurant on Bowman Street to go to? Of course it won't. It's just, for me, we need to understand how these things work and how they worked within the Bible. It is not to say that you never get what might be termed extraordinary revelation, but it's to say that's not the norm in your life. Verse 22, we also learn about Paul that he's a man worth listening to. King Agrippa, who we'll come to next week, said, I would like to hear this man myself. And he replied, tomorrow you will hear him. So I think Paul, like Jesus, learned from what he suffered. I think that when he wrote to the Philippians much later, he said this, my dear friends, as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. That's one verse in the Bible that hits me right in the eyes. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. Now, as already mentioned, Festus died 2 years later. Paul probably 2 years after that. The high priest Ananias was assassinated in AD 66 by a nationalist group of his own people. And as I said, the most dreadful civil war, followed by the destruction of the temple and the dispersion of the Jewish people. So, let me say something. Sorry, that was Paul. He's a man worth listening to. Let me say something about providence. For those of you looking at the clock saying, oh my goodness, he's going to finish early today. This is my last point, but it's not going to finish early because I really, really want us to grasp this. So there's a misunderstanding about providence that Well, the Catechism puts it wonderfully. What are God's works of providence? Question 11. God's works of providence are his most holy, wise, and powerful, preserving and governing all his creatures and all their actions. Now, there's a misunderstanding about that. There are people who go, well, that's fatalism. It doesn't matter. Whatever's going to be is going to be. No. That's not what providence is. You don't go, well, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. That's just the way of it. Nor is providence saying that God does evil. When we say that God knows and nothing happens without his knowledge and permission, we are not saying that somebody dies in a road crash and we're saying, well, that was God killed them. That's not what providence is. Let me explain what providence is. And I read this week in my favorite Puritan at the moment, Thomas Manton. And this is where you're going to get your new word. He says, providence is three things. It's conservation. God conserves and keeps all creatures in their being. Hebrews 1:3 upholds all things by the word of their power. So we had some pretty strong winds yesterday. Is that out with the control of God? No. You may be worried about climate change. Is Australia going to burn up? Right now, I could do with some burning after the 3 months that we've had. But the answer is no. No, it's not out with God's control. Now, you see what we're saying here about conservation. We're not saying that when there's a wind, God sends that wind to take the roof off your house. But what we're saying is none of that is out with his control, his knowledge, or his purposes. The other word, providence, this is the new word for me, gubernation. I just love that word, gubernation. And if you know what that is, then I'm utterly amazed. And all it means is, it's the Old English word for governing all things according to his will and pleasure. Manton points out something wonderful. So we were talking about sickness, and the children were pointing out, well, Noah was giving me a science lesson, so thank you, Noah. It was very good about all the viruses and bugs. There are billions of them. And they can all make us sick and wipe us out. Why doesn't that happen? We ask, why do bad things happen? We never really ask, why do good things happen? Or how come I'm still alive? Some of you are old enough to go, how come I'm still alive? But most of us, we don't think like that. But in reality, Manton says this, we live and breathe as the Israelites did in the midst of the Red Sea. This is a daily miracle. The fact that you are alive is part of God's governance. And then his third word is ordination, saying that God ordains all things and all things are overruled by God's great sway. And he gives us 10 principles. Don't worry, I'm just going to list them, but I hope you'll see them. Providence reaches to the least and most inconsiderable things. We had men's breakfast yesterday, and there were 3 or 4 of us. I mentioned that God knows the detail of us, the hairs on our head, and this caused amusement amongst some for whom they felt that would be a somewhat easy task for the Lord. But we were at the Samoans yesterday. It was lovely. And the kids, I love the kids. They've all got this dark black hair, and they were just. And I was speaking to the kids outside, and one of them said to me, "You better not, eat all that food, or you'll get a big belly." And I said, "Too late, And anyway, you can talk. Go and ask your parents, And I was just bantering back and forth with the kids, and they said, "Well, we've got, hair." I said, "Yeah, you've got loads of hair. Can I borrow some of yours?" Now, when Jesus says every single hair of your head is numbered, providence reaches to the least and most inconsiderable things. I used to laugh and think it was a bit trivial at people who would, go into a shopping car park and pray for a parking space. Oh, come on, that's trivial. But actually, God is concerned about all the trivial. That doesn't mean that if you pray for a parking space, you're going to get it on level 3 just at the entrance. It doesn't mean that. But we need to understand everything is within God's care. And so, just saying, poor wee Esther being sick. Well, God knows, and he's concerned about that. Secondly, providence is for all, but it's chiefly about the angels and the humans. And I love what Manton says. He says, man is rebellious. It's harder to rule a skittish horse than it is to rule a stone. In other words, if you've got a stone, you can say to the stone, hey, move here, and hey, move here. God hasn't made human beings like stones. He doesn't manipulate us like chess pieces. We are living, rational, rebellious, loving, hateful creatures. And for God's providence to shape us and direct us is an amazing thing. Thirdly, the providence of God chiefly concerns humanity, but especially God's chosen people. There is a special providence for the Lord's people. We must never forget that. We are the apple of his eye, not because we are good, but because he has chosen us. Fourthly, providence must not be considered by pieces, but altogether. You must consider the way of God with the aim of God and the means with the end. Now, what does that mean? It's just very simple. Why, Lord, did you let this happen to me? Why did that car plow into me? Why did I lose my job? Why did my husband walk out on me? And if you focus on that one thing, you will absolutely wreck yourself. And the Bible's not saying, look, you'll be able to understand everything that's happened to you, but you need to understand that it's a piece in a jigsaw that's much, much bigger than you realize. The Waterboys have this wonderful song called The Whole of the Moon, and I just love the line, I saw the crescent, you saw the whole of the moon. And one day you'll see the whole of the moon and understand that God meant it for good, just like Joseph. He said, God meant it for good, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. In case you're counting, fifthly, God manages and governs all things without difficulty. Manton says, we cast a small net. Care of our family, care of our congregation is too much for our shoulders. We are burdened by that. We cannot understand. And in fact, we say, how can God listen to the prayer of a wee child in Scottskirk and to the prayer of an old man in Kazakhstan and to the prayer of a young woman in Brazil or whatever? How can God do that? Because he's God and he's not you and he's not me. And I think that he manages and governs all things without difficulty. And what I would say is this. Have you ever spoken to somebody and you've been telling them things that really burden you and are really difficult for you? And they are. And you realize, oh, I'm wearing them out. It's just too much, can't cope. I mean, let me reverse that. Do you ever get peopled out? I do. Don't speak to me at 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, and say, listen, I've got something really important to tell you. I'm sorry. I don't have that degree of energy or compassion or anything. I'm exhausted. Let me go home. God never gets tired. God never gets weary. I was looking at, forgive me, it was for research, not because I wanted to do it, at this AI companion stuff. I was writing about it. And they've got, this it's not a woman, but this robot comes on, this image comes on and tells you, I will be your friend. You can talk to me anytime. I am there all the time for you. Yeah, but you're a robot. You're programmed. You're not really my friend and you don't care. And you're just telling me to pretend. And lots of people will go along with it. But God says, no, I will be your friend. And he has the shoulders to carry it. God's providence is conversant with sin, yet without sin. In other words, God never does wrong and never sins. That doesn't mean that he stops everyone sinning, because clearly he doesn't. But when someone sins, it's not out with his providence, and yet he doesn't do it. That's the point. Providence, this is number 7, does not take away the industry or the liberty of the creature. You'll see this with Paul later. To give you a preview of what's coming up, when in chapter 27, when Paul sails for Rome, he is told, you'll not lose a life from this ship. And yet at the same time, he says to the sailors and the soldiers, unless you all stay on this ship, you will die. How does that work? Because if you say you believe in the providence of God, you could be really lazy and say, whatever's going to be will be. Nothing I can do can change it. But God's providence is that you have to work hard. God's providence is that you have liberty and you have a degree of freedom. Then Manton says, number 8, observe the providences of God in the womb and from the womb. Psalm 139, verse 12. How precious to me are your thoughts. How great is the total of them. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. It is extraordinary to look at a baby in the womb. It's extraordinary. If you go through those whole series of photos. This is you when you were a child. This is you when you were a teenager. This is you when you're, and it's amazing. We're all fearfully and wonderfully made. And God's providence has brought you to this place. I don't know why you're here today, but I know this. God's providence brought you here, and he brought you to hear this. And you may shrug off your shoulders and say, just coincidence. No. With God, there are no coincidences. What you do with it is your responsibility. You see what I'm saying? That there's so many things. Instead of saying, oh, Lord, why did this bad thing happen? And why did this happen? And why did this happen? We should be asking, Lord, what are you teaching me? What do you want me to do? And that's why Manton number 9 says, use God's providences to overcome your own fears. Lord, I'm scared that if I go to the doctor and I have these tests and it'll show that I've got cancer. Yeah, but think of God's providence. You will not have cancer out with the providence of God and the goodness of God. And that's not fatalism. That's absolute faith. And that's because his last point is the great aim of providence is God's glory and the salvation of his people. For of him and through him, says Paul in Romans, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. See, the problem with providence is when you make it about yourself, when the whole world and the whole universe has to fit round you. It's why you get angry when someone, let's go back to the parking in Qatar, someone cuts into your space. When you do that rat race that everyone does, where it's full on a Saturday afternoon. I'm speaking obviously from bitter, heartfelt experience. Trying to find a spot, and you're just about to go in, and someone backs in front. Hey, that's not the rules. There are no rules. It's dog eat dog when that happens. But what I'm saying is we get so angry about that because it's all about us. What if the person in the car actually was more elderly and needed to be closer than you? We had this lovely old minister called Murdo. He was just absolutely wonderful. I always remember him because he always had these expressions. And my son tells me that one time he was getting a lift with Murdo, and Murdo's there in his, the full black wear, the white dog collar and everything. And there's this old lady decided to cross the dual carriageway, busy dual carriageway. And she had her kind of sticks and Zimmer, and she's like this, and she's toddling on, and cars are beep, beep, beep. And Murdo's sitting there, absolutely delayed. Well, look at her. Isn't she doing well? Good for her. God bless her. May the Lord bless her. I said, that's a wonderful way of looking at things. Instead of thinking, what's that stupid woman doing? She's holding everything up. I'm going to be 2 minutes late. No. Providence means when you trust in God's providence, you don't focus everything on yourself, but you're looking for his glory. And you know what Paul said? If I go to Rome and I'm killed, that's for the glory of God. I'm not going to tell God how to bring about his own glory. I know what I want, but above all, the aim of providence is God's glory and the salvation of his people. I know people who have been converted to Jesus Christ through the most horrible circumstances. You can't make that a rule, but I've seen it happen a lot. So, where we go with all of that, Paul and everything else, it's just simply this. You put your hands in the God who is in charge of everything. And he'll never let you down, and he will never let you go. You shake your fist at that God, you've chosen the wrong enemy. You can't win. You're not out with him. And so I want to say to those who are not Christians, in God's providence you're here, and in God's mercy, he offers you the opportunity to follow Christ. And I pray you would accept him. And if you've got any questions about that, please ask. And for those of us who are Christians and we're overwhelmed by a complaining and grumbling spirit, let's remember that we are where we are by God's providence, and God works all things for the good of those who love him. And tough as that may be, and hard to see, you're only seeing the crescent. One day you'll see the whole of the moon. Let's pray. Lord, we ask your blessing on your word. Help us to understand it and to apply it. Enable us, O Lord, to see your goodness in governing your creation and in drawing us to yourselves and in all the circumstances of our lives. In your name, amen.